Well, the man charged in the brutal Delphi murders that have haunted the Midwest for years has just been found guilty on all counts. Alex Capriello joins us live from the courthouse with the very latest. Alex.
Yeah, it took 4 days, a little bit more than 18 hours for this jury to come back with a guilty verdict on all 4 counts, meaning that Richard Allen will most likely spend the rest of his life in prison for the crimes that he was accused of and now has been found guilty of. It was a very jubilant reaction, I would say, outside of this courthouse. Remember that we were waiting on pool reporters who were actually sitting inside without any sort of laptops or cell phones to come and give us this news. When that person came out, they were holding a clipboard. It showed all 4 of the counts, and then it all showed guilty right next to them. That was the moment that we knew it was a unanimous decision from this jury. Overall, I'm getting color from inside the courtroom that it was a tearful moment for the families of the victims, Libby and Abby. They embraced each other and cried tears of joy. As for the family of Richard Allen, the defendant, it was also a very emotional time. I'm told that Richard Allen's wife and mother had trouble standing up from their seats and actually needed assistance from friends, from family, and from even the defense attorneys to actually lift them up so that way they could be escorted out of the courtroom. As for the defendant himself, Richard Allen, I'm told that he showed no emotion whatsoever when that guilty verdict came down. Sentencing for Richard Allen will be December 20th. It's possible that he could spend upwards of 130 years, meaning the rest of his life in prison. Kelly.
Wow. All right, Alex, thank you so much. Let's take a deeper look into this case now. Misty Marris is a legal analyst and trial attorney, joins us live. Misty, wow. Finally, a verdict is in after 4 days of deliberations. No hung jury. That came as quite a surprise to some. What do you make of it?
Well, you know what was interesting, Kelly, is that there weren't any jury questions that were substantive that gave us a little bit of insight as to what the jury was thinking or what the jury was focusing on during those deliberations. While those are not dispositive and we can't read the jury's mind, it sometimes can lend a little information about what maybe the jurors are looking at in that jury room, but we didn't have that. So this one really could have gone either way. There was a lot to overcome from the defense perspective because you had these confessions, 61 recorded confessions. That being said, the defense did a good job of undercutting the prosecution's case on forensics. I'm interested to see if jurors come forward and talk about what moved the needle one way or the other for them. But I have a thought. If the jurors believed that Richard Allen was Bridge Guy, the man captured in that video, the case was pretty much over and it was a conviction. If they weren't so sure, I think you could have seen an acquittal or a hung jury. So this was definitely one that we were waiting to hear where the jury landed after this 18-hour deliberation.
You know, and to your point, Misty, I noted that as well. No questions to the court as these deliberations were happening. While those questions typically do give us insights into how the jury is thinking or feeling, the absence of questions, does that provide any insight to you as to maybe what was happening behind the scenes?
Well, while we never really know because the jurors meet and discuss in secret, and that's for a reason, so that they can discuss the aspects of the case and come to that determination. There was a lot of evidence in this case on all fronts. There was a lot of witness testimony. There was the crime scene photos. There were all of the forensics. It could be that they were just methodically working through that evidence and methodically working through the charges to make a determination on whether or not they were going to be able to have a consensus. It could be that maybe there wasn't a consensus at the beginning, but then they reviewed evidence without needing to go back to the court and ask questions about the instructions and reviewed the evidence and spoke about what they saw in the courtroom. So it's not necessarily indicative of anything other than it really kept us in a bit more suspense on the outside because those jury questions can provide some insights, although it's still difficult to make a prediction.
You know, and you touched on this earlier as well, and we mentioned this earlier in the setup to the case. This was not a slam dunk for either the defense or the prosecution, as you know. No DNA directly linking Allen to these murders. How do you believe that most significantly factored into all of this, Misty, and then this eventual verdict?
Right. So the jurors are what's called the finder of fact. They weigh everything that they see in the courtroom and they make factual determinations about what happened based on the evidence. And so all of that, all of the issues relating to the forensics, I mean, the prosecutors described very brutal killings that were done almost on a whim, a crime of happenstance. He ran into the girls in the woods and then was planning on sexually assaulting them and ultimately killed them, but without any forensic or DNA linking Richard Allen. That was a huge part of the defense case. And that's why I say those confessions, if the jurors believed that he made those confessions of sound mind, it was difficult to get out of that. It was for them to weigh whether or not they were credible or not. Also, again, that video bridge guide, defense questioned the video. They said, well, there was never an analysis done about the height of this individual, whether or not it was the height of Richard Allen. Richard Allen's 5'5". Somebody described this individual as being much taller, over 6 feet tall. All of that was what the defense used to undercut. But if the jury believed that Richard Allen was bridge guy, evidence presented by prosecutors, analysis of the voice recordings from jail as compared to the bridge guy video, if they believed that narrative, if they found in favor of those facts, they believe that to be the case, then it leads to a conviction. And so really, I think those were two linchpins. If the jurors were buying that part of the case, that he's bridge guy and these confessions happened when he was in sound mind, it was difficult for there to be any other verdict than a guilty on all 4 counts.
Misty, do you anticipate this verdict will be appealed? And if so, how would his confessions play into that?
So there's no doubt that there will be an appeal. And in any criminal case, when there's a conviction, you're going to see appellate arguments. And here, some of the appellate arguments will relate specifically to evidence that came into the courtroom that the defense will say shouldn't have. There was a lot of effort to exclude a decent amount of the prosecution's ballistic evidence regarding that bullet that was found between the bodies. Defense will also argue that they should have been allowed to present an alternate theory of the case, which the court denied their ability to do. Now, whether or not those win at the end of the day, that's something that will go back through the trial record. It's called errors of law. All of that will be a part of an appellate brief. But to answer your question, those confessions, in order for an appeal to be successful, it has to be that evidence was improperly admitted or improperly excluded, and it mattered, meaning the ultimate verdict could have been or is likely to have been different based on different evidentiary, different pieces of evidence coming in or being excluded. So those confessions will make it difficult because you have Richard Allen in his own words, which clearly is something the jury took into account and based on what we see here, believed.
Yeah. Last question for you, Misty. How do you believe the defense's argument that their client made these confessions after he was in isolation, wasn't in his right mind? How do you believe that may play on appeal?
So a lot of that relates to what expert testimony was admitted, and all of that are questions for the jury to make a determination about whether or not the undercutting of the evidence that the defense presented. They presented psychiatrists, they presented other experts who testified about his mental state when he was making those confessions. The jury weighs, it's called a battle of the experts, and they weigh the prosecution's expert versus the defense expert, and they make a determination on which way they believe is the truth, and they find those facts. So the appellate court doesn't second guess the jury's determination. It's more about whether or not evidence was excluded, other experts that they wanted to testify, whether or not the prosecution should have been able to put certain evidence into the record. That's really what that appeal is based upon.
All right. Trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Marris, fascinating analysis as always. Thank you.